Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I'm sorry guys. I have to be honest, Hillary Clinton's book is fucking hilarious to me. I find this insane. Like, I have a hard time even getting mad at it because it's so cartoonish. What happened? What happened? How did I lose to reality shows? I just find this to be a fascinating thing that you could get a book named What Happened and you go around and blame everybody else. That's amazing. What happened, Hillary Clinton? That person did this. That person did that. That person did that. And her next victim, or her next culprit that Hillary Clinton is indicting, white people. She's going after white people. That's awesome. That's awesome. This is Fox News. And yes, it's Fox News, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. It's Fox News. That being said, look, when you're looking at media, or when I look at media, I understand your biases, if that makes sense. All media has a bias. There is no such thing as an unbiased position. Every position is relative to other positions. Fox News' bias is on behalf of the Republican Party against the Democratic Party. In that case, they look for information specific to challenge Democrats. MSNBC's bias is against Republicans. MSNBC's look specifically for information to go against them. RT's bias is against imperialism. It's against this kind of capitalistic thing. So they find things to go after the entire United States about. Everybody has a bias, man. It's almost like you need to understand the bias and cross-reference to understand whether or not what they're saying is true. I don't give a shit if it's a bias. Is it true? And if you can find out whether or not it's true or not, then that becomes a separate case. I can scratch out what they're thinking about it. I'm more curious about the information itself. In this case, this is somewhat of a flat fact of what Hillary Clinton herself said. So this idea of whether it's true or not is kind of besides the point. It's true. She said it. It's her quotes. Clinton, who is releasing a new memoir Tuesday titled, What Happened? That points fingers and accepts responsibility for her defeat. That's such a weird way of saying it, but Fox News is that points fingers and accepts responsibility for her defeat. That just sounds funny. Also told CBS News Sunday morning that host Jane Pauley that she won't ever run for office again. I'm done with being a candidate, but I'm not done with politics because I believe that our country's future is at stake, Clinton said during an interview at her home in Chappaqua, New York. Asked how she's doing, Clinton confessed that the loss still stings. I think I'm good, but that doesn't mean I'm complacent or resolved about what happened. It's still painful. Let me jump to this part. Clinton said she never thought of not going to Trump's inauguration as a former first lady. And so there I was on the platform, feeling like an out-of-body experience, she said. And then the speech by Trump, a cry from the white national gut. She said that during the campaign trail, Trump was quite successful, referencing a nostalgia that would give hope, comfort, and settle grievances for millions of people upset about gains made by others. Millions of white people? Paulie asked. Yeah, millions of white people, Clinton said. That's awesome. That's awesome. Those fucking white people voting for Donald Trump. How dare those fucking white people? Don't they know they should have voted for me, Hillary Clinton? Look, man, this is kind of insane to me. What is the point of a campaign? What is the point of a campaign? You're running in an election. That point of that election is trying to get votes. I would prefer people to get votes in this kind of, rainbow bright way. But unfortunately, American politics is somewhat cutthroat. These two ran the nastiest campaign on record, at least that I've been aware, that I've been alive to see. Because they had to run the nastiest campaign on record. Both people were the most hated people in American politics history. Like, imagine that right there by itself. The most hated politicians in American history, both of them. So running a campaign like that, both of them, for the most part, ran a campaign on their worst. I'm Donald Trump, and I'm an outsider, I'm a business guy, and yes, I'm a buffoon and all this other stuff, and I'm a reality show host. But I am not Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton ran and said Donald Trump will eat your goddamn babies and kick your goddamn puppies, and I am Hillary Clinton. I am the savior of America. At least from Donald Trump. They weren't looking for a savior. They was looking for somebody different. And blaming white people. Look, let's be honest. Whites vote predominantly Republican in general. That's not this first election campaign. It's not like, Trump ran somewhat of a dog whistle campaign. That's true. But let's not pretend that somehow this voting demographic was somehow different than the other voting demographics. No. Ultimately, the same people who voted for Republicans turned around and voted for Trump. Now, you had a large segment of people who couldn't bring themselves to vote for another Democrat, in which case those people, even though they voted twice for Obama, turned around and voted for Donald Trump. You have some Bernie voters who couldn't find themselves or couldn't find their way to voting for Hillary Clinton, and so they voted for Donald Trump. You had some, like myself, that voted for Jill Stein because, again, they couldn't find their way to vote to Hillary Clinton. I say this to say that it's not the situation when Donald Trump was given a racist speech and all of a sudden these racists rose up off the ether and they raised their pitchforks. That's not what happened at all. Ultimately, you had an immensely low turnout election, and there were certain states that her husband, or at the very least you can say her name, had bad things attached, particularly those trade deals. You had a situation where the sitting president is screaming in every mic that he can find that he's going to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership, when the other person who worked on the Trans-Pacific Partnership and is getting hit by Trump and Bernie Sanders for supporting the Trans-Pacific Partnership is doing her best moonwalk away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. What were the states that Hillary Clinton lost? Wisconsin, Ohio, those states that Obama carried? You may make a case that a cry from the white nationalist gut. I love that line. I have to admit, that's a hell of a turn of a phrase. I love it. You have this image in your head of just Donald Trump just screaming at the top of his lungs, this kind of white pride thing. That's not why you lost. That is not why you lost. And even if that was why you lost, A, that's more embarrassing. And B, that's a campaign. That's a campaign. I'm not necessarily saying it's the best way to run a campaign, but you ran a pretty nasty campaign against Sanders. Also, you ran a pretty nasty campaign against Donald Trump. But it's a campaign. It's an American political campaign. I'm missing how you're blaming the voters. How the hell are you blaming voters? You represent their interests, you get their vote. There's an element of tribalism to voting that is immensely true. Fair enough. The problem with the argument is that the voters who typically vote Republican continue to vote Republican. You didn't get this raise up of white nationalists coming out for Donald Trump. This just sounds insane to me. Those people were already Republican voters. What you're talking about is this kind of split or this kind of independent thing. You even had like 30% Hispanics voting for Donald Trump. That's fucking fascinating right there by itself. That's amazing. You can't blame Hispanics. You can't blame blacks for not, quote unquote, sufficiently representing you enough, sufficiently supporting you. You can't blame whites for not voting for you, particularly after alienating them during the campaign by hugging every black person that you could find during the campaign. If you're going to take an argument that Bernie Sanders is the candidate of whites, thereby extension, Hillary Clinton is the candidate of darkies in all shapes and stripes, you don't understand that in the same way that you're trying to associate yourself with one, that people who may not necessarily feel like you're on their side feel even more alienated by you doing that. If you're going to play identity politics, you're going to get burned by identity politics in the same way. It's not like, you're expanding into nothingness. You're not expanding into an empty vacuum. Something else is at the opposing end of that. Meaning, You may have this idea in your head that this country is post-race. This country is not post-race. I'm sorry. I understand. I understand the sentiment. This assumption that if you just scream that everybody is racist because they're not voting for you, I can get that. I understand you going with that. I can understand why you would want to do that. From a political standpoint, it puts somewhat of a headwind on people trying to vote for him. But you also piss people off. And you lose a certain amount of credibility with screaming that everybody is sexist, everybody is racist. All of these white people who didn't vote for you are somehow racist. I mean, I find this stuff to be absolutely amazing. A lot of people voted for a black man with a Muslim name. And then after 8 years, they got immensely racist and voted for Donald Trump. You can say they weren't necessarily racially sensitive. Fair enough. Meaning, like, Donald Trump can run a campaign in that way, and you have people who put their own economic position ahead of other people's, safety or feelings of safety and comfort. That's fair. But that's the best you can go with that. I'm sorry, that's as farthest as you can go with that. Again, yes, you have some people out there who fit that profile. But I would argue that those people were already Republicans. White guttural, white nationalist gut, a cry from the white nationalist gut. I'm amazed by that line. I have to be honest, I like the turn of the phrase, but that's somewhat of a fucked up line. Millions of white people. Yeah, millions of white people, Clinton replied. And let's talk about one last thing. She said during the campaign, Trump was quite successful, referencing a nostalgia that would give hope, comfort, and settle grievances for millions of people upset about gains made by others. The gains that they're upset about, if we're being honest, the gains that we're talking about people are upset about are fiscal. They're fiscal. Yes, there is an element of society. This is kind of the point I'm making. There is an element of society that loves that nostalgic talk. This make America great again, dog whistle of, hey, let's go back to the time where things were great for you. That's just hope and change. Just cut for a different audience. Be honest. Settle grievances, again, for some people, but the question becomes, were those people already Republicans? The answer is yes. Those people were already Republicans. You didn't expand the voter pool. This wasn't a situation where you got 57% of the vote and you had all of these additional people who came out purely for Donald Trump. That did not happen. That did not happen at all. What those people were upset about, the grievances that those people had, the grievances that wasn't necessarily being addressed by either party, by the establishment of either party, and that Donald Trump at the very least said something about, was economic. Do you understand the sad state that we're in when a billionaire, blue-collar billionaire, a guy who led his entire life fucking over everybody else, was able to beat the Democratic Party in a populist campaign? If that doesn't show you how far you've fallen, man, that is amazing. That's the grievances. I would wager to you, I would almost guarantee you that the level of racial division, this level of division between all these different ethnic groups and everything else, the division by ethnic groups for the most part is somewhat artificial. It's one of the biggest hoodwinks that has ever taken place on American soil. The issue that we deal with is issues of class. Yes, issues of race also, but the issues that we're talking about are issues of class. Those people, put it this way, races aren't born, races are created based on a society. There's certain pressures in the society, one of those pressures being economic, that creates stresses between various demographics. The demographics start to aggregate around one another. They feel comfortable around one another. And to some degree, they find strength in each other. They're a group unto themselves. America looks at these things through the lens of race. From that lens of race, you have this kind of demographic one against the other, or at the very least from the standpoint of these demographics, placing one demographic against the other demographic. Those things are emboldened by economic stress. Yes, I would hope people were better, but let's not pretend that there aren't societal factors associated with making that worse. In the same way that there are societal factors in making hurricanes worse, there are social factors, things that are structural that makes that worse. What these people were pissed at were the last 8 years. If you're going to give 95% of the wealth to the top 1%, and you're going to call yourself a Democratic president, and you ran your campaign as if you were this most progressive thing since FDR, that's called a failure. That's called a failure. Those people were hurting. Now, you can call it this, this cry from the white nationalist gut. That's fine, but understand what we're having a conversation about is class. Democrats want to stand this thing of identity. The problem is that you're standing with this thing of identity. The only playing field that you guys have, the playing field the Democrats tend to have, is on economics. That's your playing field. When you ceded that territory, you for the most part ceded 1,000 seats, the House, the Senate, and Supreme Court. You ceded everything. So this idea that everybody who voted for Trump is racist, I'm sorry, is insane. Let's not pretend that those people weren't already part of the Democratic Party, and let's stop pretending as if Trump somehow expanded the voter pool. That's not what happened. She just lost, and she's looking for another group to pin that blame onto. And amazingly, she's found voters. She's found voters. I find this to be absolutely amazing. Alright guys, I'll leave it at that. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, write, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the work through Patreon. Thank you.